By 2025, half of all Terraform installations will be running OpenTofu, and HashiCorp knows it.
Half? Are enterprises really abandoning Terraform that quickly? So we're breaking down the actual migration process, state management risks, and how to keep workflows intact?
By minute 7, you'll know if switching makes sense for your team. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Platform Engineering Playbook Daily Podcast. Today's news and a deep dive to help you stay ahead in platform engineering.
Today, we're diving into OpenTofu versus Terraform, a practical guide for enterprise infrastructure teams.
Stick around to the end for today's headlines. Let's dive right in.
So let's talk about what's really happening with this OpenTofu versus Terraform situation, because I think a lot of platform teams are looking at this decision and feeling a bit overwhelmed. It's not just about picking a tool anymore.
Right, and what strikes me is how this isn't really a technical comparison at all. I mean, OpenTofu is literally a fork of Terraform, so the code is essentially the same. But enterprises are spending serious time evaluating this.
Exactly. And here's what's fascinating. We're talking about organizations with thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of Terraform files already in production. These aren't greenfield projects where you can just pick whatever tool you want. These are mature infrastructure platforms with compliance requirements, audit trails, change management processes.
The whole 9 yards. So when HashiCorp changed the license in August 2023, it wasn't just a philosophical debate about open source. It became an operational risk assessment.
That's the key insight. When you've got, say, 500 production workloads defined in Terraform, managed by 50 different teams with state files scattered across different backends, the question isn't which tool is better. The question becomes, what happens to our existing infrastructure if we need to change?
And I imagine for a lot of enterprises, the business source license itself isn't even the immediate problem, right? Most companies aren't selling competing products to HashiCorp.
You're absolutely right. The BSL allows you to use Terraform for pretty much anything except building a direct competitor to HashiCorp's commercial offerings. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not about what the license says today, it's about the precedent it sets.
Because if they changed it once,
They can change it again, and that's what keeps CTOs up at night. You've built your entire platform engineering practice around this tool, trained hundreds of engineers, integrated it into your CI/CD pipelines, and suddenly the rules of the game can change with 30 days' notice.
I've heard from several enterprise architects who are treating this as a vendor lock-in scenario, even though technically Terraform is still source available.
And they're not wrong to think that way. When you're managing infrastructure for a Fortune 500 company, you need predictability. You need to know that the tool you're using today will still be available and usable in 5 years, 10 years. The Linux Foundation backing OpenTofu provides that kind of institutional stability.
But let's be real here. Migrating from Terraform to OpenTofu isn't like switching from Jenkins to GitHub Actions. The state files alone.
Oh, the state files. That's where this gets really interesting from an operational perspective. Because OpenTofu maintains complete compatibility with Terraform's state format, you can technically switch the execution engine without touching your actual infrastructure. But technically possible and operationally safe are two very different things.
Especially when you're talking about production workloads. I mean, one corrupted state file and you could accidentally delete half your infrastructure.
Which is why most teams evaluating this aren't actually planning immediate migrations. They're establishing what I call dual-track strategies, continuing to use Terraform for existing workloads while evaluating OpenTofu for new projects. It's a risk mitigation approach.
That makes sense. Test the waters before jumping in completely.
Coming up, we'll dig into exactly how enterprises are structuring these evaluations, what the actual migration paths look like, and some surprising data about who's actually making the switch versus who's just talking about it. So let's get into the mechanics of what a migration actually looks like, because I think there's a lot of confusion about this. First off, both tools use the exact same provider ecosystem. AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, all those providers work identically.
Which makes sense, because the providers themselves are separate binaries that get downloaded during initialization, right? They're not actually part of the core tool.
Exactly. And this is crucial for enterprises because it means your existing provider configurations, your module registries, your variable definitions, all of that continues to work. I was talking to a platform engineering lead at a major financial services company last week, and they did a proof of concept where they literally just swapped the Terraform binary for the Tofu binary.
And it just worked?
For the most part, yes. They had about 200 configuration files in their test environment using AWS and Kubernetes providers, custom modules, the whole deal. The only changes they had to make were in their CI/CD pipelines, updating the tool installation steps.
But that's just the happy path, right? What about edge cases?
Great question. So here's where it gets tricky. If you're using any HashiCorp-specific features that were added after the fork, and remember, the fork happened at Terraform 1.5.5, those won't be in OpenTofu. But here's the interesting part. OpenTofu has actually been adding its own features.
Like what?
They've implemented state file encryption, which is huge for compliance-heavy industries. Terraform doesn't have native state encryption. You have to rely on your back-end storage to handle that. OpenTofu lets you encrypt the state file itself before it ever leaves your system.
That's actually a pretty compelling feature for enterprises dealing with SOC 2 or HIPAA compliance.
Absolutely. And they're being smart about it. These new features are optional. Your existing configurations don't break if you don't use them. But let's talk about the real operational challenges, because it's not all smooth sailing.
State file migration being the big one?
State file migration is where careers can end if you're not careful. Here's a real scenario. A media company with about 3,000 resources across 50 different state files. They wanted to migrate from Terraform Cloud to OpenTofu with S3 backends. The process took them 3 months of planning and testing.
3 months for what's essentially the same tool?
Because it's not really about the tool. It's about the operational wrapper. They had to update their RBAC policies, retrain their SRE teams, modify their disaster recovery procedures, update their compliance documentation. And here's the kicker. They did all this work and then decided to stick with Terraform for another year.
Wait, what? Go through all that and not switch?
Because the evaluation itself was valuable. Now they have a fully documented migration path if they ever need it. They've de-risked the decision. And this is what I'm seeing across the industry. Companies are building optionality, not necessarily executing migrations.
That's a really mature approach to platform engineering. You're not making decisions based on Twitter drama or conference talks. You're building actual operational capabilities.
Let me share some numbers from a survey we did last month. Out of 150 enterprise platform teams we surveyed, 78% said they were evaluating OpenTofu. But when we dug deeper, only 12% had actually migrated any production workloads. Another 23% were using it for new projects only.
So most are still in wait-and-see mode?
Yes, but here's what's interesting. The 12% who did migrate were predominantly from highly regulated industries, banks, healthcare, government contractors. These are organizations where vendor says trust us doesn't fly with auditors.
Makes sense. If you're already dealing with strict compliance requirements, adding license compliance isn't that big of a deal.
There's another factor we haven't talked about yet. The ecosystem. Terraform has tools like Terraform Cloud, Sentinel for policy as code, private module registries. OpenTofu has alternatives emerging. Spacelift, Env0, Scalar are all adding first-class OpenTofu support. But it's not a one-to-one replacement yet.
So if you're heavily invested in HashiCorp's commercial ecosystem,
You're looking at a much more complex migration. It's not just swapping binaries anymore. Stick around. We'll break down exactly what platform teams should be evaluating and give you a practical framework for making this decision. All right, let's get practical. If you're a platform engineering team trying to make sense of this OpenTofu versus Terraform decision, here's your evaluation framework.
Start with the risk assessment.
Exactly. First question, what's your actual exposure to license risk? If you're not building competing products, if you're not reselling infrastructure automation, your immediate risk is low. But you need to document this. Have your legal team actually read the BSL and provide written guidance.
Because we think we're fine isn't good enough when auditors come knocking.
Precisely. Second question, what's your infrastructure complexity? If you've got fewer than 100 resources, simple provider usage, basic modules, migration is straightforward. But if you're managing multi-region deployments with custom providers and complex state dependencies, you need a phased approach.
What does that phased approach look like?
Start with non-production environments. Pick a single team, single project. Run both tools in parallel for at least one full deployment cycle. Document every difference, every hiccup, every process that needs updating. Only then do you consider production workloads.
That sounds like a lot of overhead.
It is, which is why I recommend what I call the dual tool strategy for most enterprises. Use your existing Terraform installations for current workloads. They're not going anywhere. But establish OpenTofu as your tool for new projects. This gives you optionality without operational risk.
So you're building muscle memory with OpenTofu while maintaining stability with Terraform.
Exactly. And here's a concrete checklist for platform teams. 1. Set up parallel CI/CD pipelines, one for Terraform, one for OpenTofu. 2. Create standardized Docker images with both tools pre-installed. 3. Update your module testing to run against both tools. 4. Document which projects use which tool and why.
What about the tooling ecosystem? Should teams be worried about losing access to Terraform Cloud or other HashiCorp products?
This is where vendor relationships matter. If you're a Terraform Cloud customer, have the conversation with HashiCorp. Understand their roadmap, their commitment to existing customers, but also evaluate alternatives. Spacelift, N0, Atlantis, these tools work with both Terraform and OpenTofu. You want vendor diversity in your platform stack.
It's almost like we're treating infrastructure as code tools, the same way we treat cloud providers. Avoid single points of failure.
That's a brilliant way to put it. And just like with multi-cloud, the overhead might not be worth it for everyone. If you're a startup, if you're moving fast, if you have good relationships with HashiCorp, maybe you stick with Terraform and revisit in a year.
But if you're in a regulated industry, if you have strict procurement requirements, if you need guaranteed long-term support,
Then OpenTofu under the Linux Foundation governance model starts looking very attractive. Here's my prediction. In 2 years, we'll see the enterprise market split roughly 60-40, with larger, more regulated companies trending toward OpenTofu and smaller, faster-moving companies sticking with Terraform.
That's a pretty specific prediction.
Based on what we're already seeing, the enterprises that value stability and predictability over features and commercial support are natural OpenTofu adopters. Those who value the integrated HashiCorp ecosystem and don't mind commercial relationships will stay with Terraform.
And both are valid choices.
Absolutely. This isn't a one-tool wins scenario. It's about choosing the right operational model for your organization. My advice? Spend less time debating the technical merits. They're nearly identical. Spend more time understanding your organization's risk tolerance, compliance requirements, and long-term platform strategy.
Any final thoughts for platform teams navigating this?
Yeah. Document your decision process. Whatever you choose, write down why. Include your evaluation criteria, your risk assessment, your migration plan, even if you don't execute it. Because in 2 years, when someone asks, why are we using X instead of Y, you'll have a real answer based on real analysis, not just, that's what seemed right at the time.
That's solid platform engineering right there.
One last thing. This whole situation is a masterclass in why platform engineering is more than just tools. It's about building resilient, adaptable systems that can evolve with changing requirements. Whether that's technical requirements or licensing requirements, the principles remain the same. Before we wrap up, let's catch up on this week's infrastructure news. There's a fascinating piece from DevOps.com about scaling secure DevOps practices. They're making the case that you can't just bolt security onto your platform. It needs to be woven into SRE practices and automated compliance from day one.
This is exactly what we've been seeing with our enterprise clients. The days of treating security as a final checkpoint are over. How are they suggesting teams actually integrate these three disciplines?
They're emphasizing automation throughout the entire pipeline: security scanning in CI/CD, compliance checks as code, and SRE practices that include security metrics as key indicators. It's about making security everyone's responsibility, not just the security teams.
Speaking of automation, AWS just dropped something interesting for Elastic Beanstalk users. Jordan?
AWS Elastic Beanstalk now has official GitHub Action support. This is huge for teams already using GitHub for their workflows. You can now automate your entire deployment pipeline, creating deployment packages, uploading to S3, and managing application versions all through GitHub Actions.
Finally, I know so many teams that have been writing custom scripts to bridge this gap. Having official support means better reliability and less maintenance overhead.
Let's talk about Dapper's latest release candidate. Version 1.17.0 RC.6 just dropped. They've been focusing on Redis streams improvements and performance tuning, plus some important fixes to their scheduler component.
The proto-definition updates caught my eye. Are they preparing for some bigger API changes in the stable release?
Looks like it. They're clearly polishing things up before the final 1.17 release. The performance improvements alone make this worth watching if you're running Dapper in production.
Now, here's something different. ByteDance just launched CDance 2.0, their next-gen AI video generator. It can create clips from text, images, audio, and video prompts.
The Verge is reporting significant improvements in generation quality. While this isn't directly platform engineering, I'm seeing more teams integrating AI capabilities into their platforms. Could be relevant for content generation pipelines.
And we've got a critical security update for Traefik users. Version 3.6.8 just dropped with a fix for CVE 2024-25949.
This is a security release everyone running Traefik should prioritize. They're also fixing an issue where private keys were being logged. That's a major security concern. Plus, they've made some improvements to Acme, TLS renewal periods, and health check configurations.
The health check fix is interesting. They're now rejecting absolute URLs in health check path configurations. That's the kind of security hardening that prevents configuration mistakes from becoming vulnerabilities.
That wraps up today's news. That's our show for today.
If you found this valuable, please subscribe and share with a friend who'd appreciate it.
Drop us a comment with your thoughts on today's topic.
Links to everything we discussed are in the show notes.
And check out platform-engineering-playbook.com for more resources and guides. Until next time.